It's going to be part two of controlling, fear controlling you. And it says, are you being controlled by fear? And how can we find that out? Number one is when fear becomes your prison. Hear what I'm saying? Because a lot of us are prisoners to fear. And we don't even know it. That's number one. When fear becomes your prison, fear has got you as a prisoner, okay? When fear becomes your bondage, how many of us are bondage and bondage over fear? See, being a prisoner of fear and being in bondage of fear, it all goes hand in hand. And yet and still, we don't even realize that you in bondage, that you're a prisoner to fear. You know, a lot of Christians go from paradise of faith to prisoners of fear. Hear what I'm saying? A lot of Christians go from paradise of faith. Okay, they in paradise when it comes to faith. And all of a sudden something goes on, fear comes in and whatnot, and they go from a paradise of faith into the prisoner of fear. Isn't that something that we as Christians will sit up here and go from where God has taken us to paradise, and we'll let fear bring us to a prison? And if you are controlled by fear, you are a prisoner of fear. I'll say that again. If you are controlled by fear, you are a prisoner of fear. Isn't that something? Once again, are you a prisoner of fear? We are hiding from God. Isn't that, it's this, this is so important that we are hiding from God. Though fear has you hiding from God. How can this? Fear has you so afraid that you are literally hiding from God because of fear. Isn't that amazing? We are hiding from God because of fear. When you are in fear, you are fearing the future. Okay? Hear what I'm saying? When you are in fear, you are fearing the future because you don't know what your future holds. And that makes you afraid. You should never fear the future. You should never fear where God is taking you or what God has for you. And yet and still, when you are in fear, you are fearing the future. Fearing sickness, fearing job loss, fearing healing, all this stuff is fear. You are feeling sickness. You are feeling your job loss. And I seen this. Wow, I seen people fear job loss because they walk timid because they are so afraid that if they do something or say something, okay. I have a lot of people at my job like that they don't want to make any riffles. They don't want to make they don't want to be noticed. They want to stay under the radar, okay, because they so afraid that if they say something or do something, even if it's right, okay, that they fear their job. Okay, and I know nobody want to lose a job, but you have to stand up for something. Okay, if you don't stand up for something, you fall for anything. And so many people, when it comes to the job thing and whatnot, a lot of people that happen to, you're feeling healing. You're fearing healing. You can't get healed because you feel fearing it. Isn't that crazy? Fear will make you hide from God. Jesus delivered us from the spirit of fear. He delivered us from the spirit of fear, and yet and still we let fear get on us and do things to us. What is the bondage in your life that has come because of fear? Okay, what is the bondage in your life that has come because of fear? What have you bondage, has you tied up in everything else because of fear? Because see, we all have some kind of bondage that's holding us, that's keeping us from what God has for us because of the spirit of fear. And God is trying to deliver us from that. He's trying to get us out of that. And that's what this message is all about. When fear is controlling your life, when fear comes in, it steals your focus away from God. Hear what I'm saying? When fear comes in, it steals your focus away from God and God's word. Isn't that so? We don't look at it like that though. You are being controlled by fear. Whatever you focus on, you give strength to. So if you focusing on fear, that's what you're giving strength to. If you focus on bad news all day long and focus on fear all day long and you're being controlled by fear, okay, you have to get back on focus on God. Let me try to say that again. When you are focusing on bad news all day long, okay, and you focus on fear all day long, and everything all day long is controlled by fear, okay, you have to stop and you have to get back on focus on God, because that's the only thing that's going to deliver you from this spirit of fear is getting back on focus. Reading God's word. People don't realize reading God's word take away the spirit of fear. It puts you back on track. It puts you back on focus. Getting back on spending time with praying. Prayer goes a long way, and people don't take that serious. You know, we think that we just say a prayer and whatnot. That's it. But when you spend time in God's word, and when you pray and spend time in prayer, God answers you. He hears you. He puts that focus back on you where it needs to be. But we don't want to do that. We allow fear to dictate on how we live. When we focus on when you focus on fear, it hardens your heart against the love of God and the faith of God. Hear what I'm saying again. When you focus on fear, it hardens your heart against the love of God and the faith of God. Okay, and that's really something else. You know, it literally hardens your heart, and it the love of God and the faith of God. It takes the focus out of that. You know, fear will take you all over the place. Have you ever? And Lord, I know I've been there. Have you ever been so afraid and whatnot that you don't know if you're coming and going, you don't know what to do, you don't know where to go, because you're so fearful of things and whatnot, or fearful of something and whatnot that has you bonded. And it's a shame and whatnot that fear has you all over the place. Okay? Fear has you all over the place. And God is saying, calm down, settle down, get back into your word, because your word is where God is going to show you the focus. Your word is where God is going to teach you about fear. He's going to get you out of fear. You know, it will help bring you back into focus about what God is saying. See, this is why prayer is so important. This is why reading God's word is so important, because it eliminates fear. Fear is going to come no matter what, but there's a way to stop it. See, and we have to learn how to stop it, and yet and still we don't. You have to focus. You have gotten everything that God had. Okay, let me put it. You have forgotten everything that God has done. Isn't that something? We have forgotten that everything that God done. Okay, because of fear. When fear comes in, take 30 minutes in God's word, and He will bring you back to everything. He will bring you back, and everything coming back into focus. You can take 30 minutes into God's word, and it will bring you back to everything that God has you focusing on. It'll bring you back to God's focus, not fear's focus, but God's focus. God has already done amazing things in our lives, and yet and still we forget all the amazing things that God has done in our life. Don't let fear rob you from your focus, because that's exactly what fear does. It robs you from your focus. Okay? When fear makes you hear outside influences over the voices of God outside of God's word, then you are being controlled by fear. Let me see if I can break that down. When fear makes you hear people on the outside, they talking and whatnot, and you listening and being influenced by the people on the outside over the voice of God that's inside of you and God's word, then you are being controlled by fear. Isn't that amazing? The fear will make you listen to people outside before you listen to God's word. You know, we fall prey to things that sound like God. See, Satan will sit up here and use scriptures and whatnot to sound like God. You know, fear causes. Wow, I'm gonna have to go back a little bit deeper on that. We fall prey to things that sound like God. How many times have we sit up here and heard something that sound like it came from God and it came from Satan? Why? Because Satan is a duplicate and he's always trying to mimic God. He's always trying to use the word against you. And Satan knows the word better than anybody do. Okay? And he will sit up here and use God's word and sit up here and twist God's word and make you think that it's coming from God when it's not. And it's coming from Satan. You know, fear caused Peter to try and stop Jesus from his purpose. See, people don't realize Peter was the rock. Jesus said he made him the rock. He will build his foundation on this rock. But at the same time and whatnot, Jesus also told Peter, get away from me, Satan. Okay? Isn't that amazing? The same person that he was going to make the rock, he had to sit up here and say, get away from me, Satan. You know why? Because Peter was being moved by outside voices, not by God. He was listening to everything that was going on outside, and he forgot about the voice of God. And he started trying to talk Jesus on out of his purpose, because even though Peter thought that he was doing something good, he was operating under fear. And this is why Jesus told him, get away from me, Satan. See, a lot of people don't realize that, you know. Fear causes us to be moved from outside voices, you know, and not by God's point of view. See, fear causes us to be moved from outside voices. People coming from the outside. Fear will cause you to be moved from their voices and forget all about what God's point of view is. Isn't that crazy that we forget about God's point of view? We see things from a human point of view and not from God's point of view. We start looking, when we operate in fear, we start seeing things in a human point of view and not God's point of view. Okay? We have the God that made the universe at our disposal. Isn't that something? We have a God that made the universe at our disposal, and yet we still operating in fear. We still allowing fear to dictate to how we live, what we're going to do. Satan will always make fear sound like God. Hear what I'm saying? Satan will always make fear sound like God. See, Satan wants make you think that God is going to punish you, God is going to do this, God is going to do that and whatnot. And that's Satan doing that to make fear sound like God. You know, and that's not God at all. You know, and so you will take it. And we do. We'll sit up here and listen to it and we'll take it. I'm going to go into the part 3 of this and whatnot. You know, this might go into a part 4, I don't know, because fear has a lot to do with this, and I have to get this out and whatnot. God gave this to me, and I want people to know what we up against, so when it comes at us, we know what to do. So I'll be going into a part 3 on this.